Well, we've got a few people here watching, so we don't want to keep them in suspense much longer.
Cool.
Hello to everybody else that just came on. And so we want to dive in here a little bit. Lino, I didn't really talk about you introducing yourself at all, but would you like to say a few words about yourself and just who you are? So I'll say this at least, all right, is Lino was a part of Connect Church when I became the pastor here. And so he's been around. So I've known you for a little over 5 years now. Can you believe that?
Right.
Been just over 5 years. And yeah, it's been great. I feel like, anyway, you'd have to speak to this, but I feel like I've seen a lot of growth in you, and just since the time that we've been here, and I've seen your relationship with God continue to grow, and it's just been really an awesome thing to watch. And you really are. I've always enjoyed our conversations because you really have a very unique perspective. I think it's a little bit different, a little bit, we talk about it all the time. You've got that analytical, logical kind of mindset that I can drift into from time to time as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that. I like that because I remember my dad saying it one time, and I say it to a lot of people all the time, of just being in a place where you're asking questions is one of the best places I feel like you can be, no matter where you are in your journey with Christ, is being in a place where you can ask questions. And so I think it's a good thing. And you're a guy that asks a lot of questions. And so I enjoy that. Some people think they're irritating when they do that, but I really enjoy it. So anyway, so we've had a great friendship. We've been over to the house a few times and enjoyed some meals together, and it's been great. So I was excited to have you on. We're going to talk specifically about a couple things here in a little bit, and the reason I wanted to have you on, but we'll get to that in just a moment. But tell me a little bit, or tell us a little bit, Lino, about yourself, and kind of maybe we're kind of starting off everything with just kind of, you know, your relationship with God, maybe when you became a Christian, and just real quickly, just kind of start from there. Quickly begin from there.
I'm hearing a little bit of echo there. I'm not sure, but basically, like you mentioned, I'm probably been around for a while. Back in 2012, my wife Helen, we weren't married at the time, but she introduced me to the church, and we started attending back when it was at the Albion-Bolton Community Center. And I just, I don't know, almost immediately found it sort of I guess I'm a little blunt sometimes. I'll just say I found it a stark contrast to my strict Catholic upbringing. I was brought up fairly strictly Catholic, went to an all-boys Catholic school in high school. And I found that I didn't realize it, but I guess I just had grown up thinking that my relationship with God consisted of going to church every Sunday, religiously, pun intended, I guess, and saying a lot of rosaries. And I thought that was, and being generally good. And I thought that's what you do, check the boxes, and don't do anything horrible, and I'll get into heaven. And that's the way it works. Yeah. And there wasn't ever, up until that time, I guess 2012, so I would have been 42. So I went that many years of my life without having a sort of a true relationship with God. You know, Christ didn't really speak to me. Maybe periodically at times there were times, but so in 2012 I found this whole new experience, and that kind of kicked me off on this new path. Work in progress, definitely. I think we all are. We're meant to be. And that led to me being baptized. Actually, you did my baptism there in the river, and I found that was an amazing experience doing it in the river, because from our conversations over the years, I'm kind of nostalgic, I guess, about things the way they were done in biblical times, and to do something, to be baptized in a way that was, very similar to being baptized in the Jordan. It was like, wow, that was really an awesome kind of milestone for me. And my stepdaughter Lynn was baptized at the same time. Um, to me, the baptism was sort of just another milestone and a mark, a symbol of, again, work in progress. It's just keep going from there. But that's kind of how I came into the church. I don't know if there's any other
No, it's
sort of
good.
background or anything that you
I
want to know,
I
but
like to lay a little foundation. That's
a
all
little
as we get started.
foundation.
So, yeah. So part of really my heart in doing this and starting this last week. And last week we had Michelle, and I came across a verse that apparently I turned the page on, so now I have to try to find it again. Um, well, I'll just say it, all right. But I was reading in Hebrews last night and talked about the fact of to find ways to find ways to encourage one another to love and to serve, and always finding new ways. It's in Hebrews chapter 10, and it's just before it talks about not forgetting to gather together, and that verse that we talk about all the time. But that first part, just before that, it talks about that we should always be looking for ways to encourage one another, or I think in one translation I read it was to spurn one another forward, to encourage and to love and to serve. And I really feel like that this is a part of that. What we're doing here today is just an encouragement in these times that we're living in, these pandemic times that we're living in, where we're all trying to figure out what's going on, but also it's allowed for a lot of people. It's allowed kind of a time of reflection in a way, because so much of life kind of gets stripped away, and you really have nothing left to do but to think about things. And so in kind of in that vein, you and I have been talking recently, and really, I guess it was, let's go back to this point, is right, I think it was the week they announced that there could no longer be gatherings of 5 people or more. And so that was when we made the decision, to go along with that, we were going to have to close the doors of the church, so to speak, and take church services online and connect groups online and all of those things. But that week, we gathered a bunch of people together here at the church, kind of the last official meeting we had in the building. And we just sat and talked about, what can we do going forward? We looked at it as a horrible opportunity. As I heard a friend of mine say, this horrible opportunity was presented to us to kind of be the hands and feet of Jesus in the community. We didn't really know at that time what it would look like. And then a couple weeks, I guess, into it, we found this opportunity. So we'll get to that in just a second, but let's start here, I guess. Is tell me a little bit about what's been going on, I guess, what's been going on in your life, what's been going on in your mind, in your home, as we look at kind of that period of, maybe this period of reflection, and kind of what's been going on, and what have you been thinking through?
I guess the word we keep hearing is the new normal. And I think what we've been seeing is that there's a lot of it is sort of summed up in, well, isolation. We keep hearing that word too. So and it's kind of up to us how isolated we feel or want to be right now, because we can be, there's the social, they call it social distancing. I think of it as just physical distancing, because we still need to remain connected in this time. So we just came off 14 days of additional self-isolation, because my stepdaughter Lynn had some mild symptoms for a couple of days, and we went on and used the assessment tool from the Ontario government, and they said the whole family must self-isolate. So that was even extra lonely, and that was, there wasn't even really much. You couldn't go out to a store. You could, we were very, and thank you for dropping off some groceries. Much appreciated. We were really stuck, and I'll admit, towards the end there, we snuck out one evening around 10 o'clock at night. We took a walk around the block because we were losing it. But as a family, though, you're coming together much more than you ever have in the past, because usually, kids are off to school. My wife Helen and I were off to work, and my oldest stepdaughter's off to work, and my daughter's off to work. Everybody's just, they go their own separate ways, and you come back together, and we try to make sure we always eat a meal together as a family. Even now, that's something that we're doing. We still, we cook and we eat at the same time, and we talk about our day. We've added to that now, where we sort of talk about maybe our feelings, or something good that's happened, to break the monotony in our day. Like the UPS guy drove up. Ooh, he dropped something off. We get all excited. We talk about the new. We got some spaghetti today. Ooh.
Yeah.
We got Costco popcorn. Woo. So a big part of that is it's the little things now that sort of bring us happiness. When we come together for a meal, it's the little things we're talking about. It used to be the big things. It used to be, graduation's coming up. You're going to college. But it's up to us to sort of remain positive and to talk about those little things. Church online. It's church on Sunday is a weekly milestone. It's something we do every week. So we get up, we get on the couch with a coffee, and we sit down, and we feel like we're with everyone, because it's the little things. Esther throws a comment up on the Facebook feed when we're watching church online, and she's got a great sense of humor, and I throw a comment up, and you have this banter, and it's about still remaining connected, and it's different, but these little things sort of keep us on the same path. Like the path doesn't change despite this chaos is happening around us. But I think that the Christ-like path that we're supposed to stay on doesn't change. It's something you always message, and it hits home with me, is that it is eternal. God's character is eternal. His commandments are eternal, and the path that we're called on to take doesn't change because there's this pandemic thing happening around us. We do smart, practical things. We take precautions. We wear masks. We physically distance from one another. But that's all. For this world, that's a smart thing to do. And I think God expects us to be smart about our health. That's he because our life is so precious. God expects us to treat it as a precious thing, and to take reasonable precautions, and to not come together physically in a church in opposition to what smart people are telling us to do, like our health officials and all of that. But at the same time, all of that aside, our path doesn't need to change, but it's up to us to really sort of do what we're doing here today is another example. To talk about it, so that these things, you call them little things, but they keep us connected.
Well, and that was what you had talked about that last night. Excuse me, last night when we were talking, is that you're generally a person that thinks about the next big thing. So the next big vacation, the next big promotion, the next big thing. But this has really highlighted the, I don't know what the word would be. It's highlighted the small things, and kind of the blessing of the small things.
Yeah, that's I guess, like one of the things I compare it to is like during Jesus' years of preaching and teaching, and his travels, it was always the small things that were sort of enjoyed and celebrated. They had nothing. He traveled around with this gang that went city to city, village to village, and they didn't have supplies in the pantry. They didn't have 500 rolls of toilet paper with them, but they managed to go and to be accepted and to connect with other Christians, and God provided wherever they went.
Yeah.
They had what they need, and they enjoyed the small things. They enjoyed bread, fish. They enjoyed camaraderie and fellowship with new people, those small things. And I feel like this is kind of helping to reset my focus, because that is a bit of that is, I think, quite a biblical focus, is to take the joy from those smaller and simple things, because we have this, probably the only unique opportunity we're going to have in most of our lives, to really have this opportunity to kind of narrow our focus a little bit. Things are moving in. They're more local. We're not thinking big. We're not thinking local. We're thinking about just staying safe and staying in our small bubbles of people and getting through this, as they say. And
Well, I think that's part of what's in me talking with other people and things like that, and even my mindset, somewhere, we can tend to have such a, and there's nothing wrong with this, but having a global mindset, and I think we are supposed to have a global mindset as well, but this has really brought in the simplicity of just what can I immediately do, and whether that's how can I take care of my family in a different way and provide for my family in a different way, because I think oftentimes we think of the big thing, is how can I provide a vacation for my family, how can I provide this for my family, how can I provide that, and now it's just like, how can I provide sanity for my sanity for my family. But it's even in one sense for me, as a pastor, it's rethinking church. And so for somebody like yourself that's a part of the church, then I think, we talked a little bit about it the other day, of just rethinking Christianity from a practical standpoint of what does it mean. Before we used to think, okay, to share Christ, I got to invite somebody to church and I got to sit down with them, I got to build this whole thing. Whereas now we're kind of, it's different now. And so we can invite people to church online, which is actually working really well. We've got lots of people inviting people to church, maybe more than ever, because it's as simple as hitting the share button on your Facebook page, right? But just kind of, I think finding purpose in the midst of the pandemic, and I think there's been a shift there that's happened a little bit. And talk to me a little bit about that, if you can, if that helps.
Yeah, I think God has designed us to seek purpose, and in doing so, even in times like this, probably more so than ever, we're called upon, and God puts things in our heart to help. When I look at like, as an example that comes to mind for me, is like Jesus in the garden before his crucifixion, Garden of Gethsemane, when he was praying, and somebody lost an ear. Right, there was a little bit of a sword incident there, if we all recall, and somebody lost an ear, and it was I guess it was a Roman soldier. And, so what a lot of people take from that story, when Jesus healed that ear, was that, I think what a lot of people take from it, and I have always taken from it, that it was just this simple story, maybe, of helping even your enemies. You would help them. And I've taken something else from it at this time. And what I've taken from it now is, no matter how bad things are for you, it's amazing and wonderful and enriching to be able to take the time to help someone else.
Yeah.
So Jesus, like, I put myself into his mindset. It's like, he's scared, he's nervous, he's praying, he's about to die. He knows it.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, but I can heal this guy, and I'm going to do that now, because this guy needs help now, and this needs to be done. And that's how I see things during the pandemic. And that's something that my wife Helen always sort of demonstrates for me, is sometimes things just need to be done. It doesn't matter what's going on for me. God calls on you and says, this thing, it needs to be done. So one of the things I remember, an example, like big one for me right now that came up out of that meeting that we had before, as you say, the church had to shut its doors to normal gatherings, was that one opportunity that came up probably a couple weeks afterwards was the local pharmacy in Bolton
Mhm.
needed some deliveries done
Yeah.
because there are a lot of sort of elderly and disabled individuals in nearby in our town that needed to get their sort of life-saving prescriptions, and they were people who either couldn't get into the pharmacy or were very high risk individuals.
Right.
And that was an opportunity that, I think uh, God, through one of our church members, he had the need. God, I imagine, put it in his heart. He brought that need forth to you. You brought it forth to me as an opportunity. And I was kind of like, that sounds really good. Because one of my big philosophies is I love doing things that are practical.
Yeah.
And getting medications to people who couldn't get them, who were in need, and at this time seemed like, that's hands and feet of Jesus stuff. That's the stuff that I'm passionate about.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not going to lead worship anytime soon. That's couldn't do it if I wanted to. There's a lot of things. My son Toby, Chris at church has been kind of teaching him up until this pandemic happened. He was teaching him the soundboard, and Toby's getting really good at that. He's really passionate about that sort of thing, about the technical stuff, which I have a technical side, but I really like sort of the just feet on the floor kind of stuff. So um, I've been doing that up until we had our 14 days of isolation, but I'll be starting again this week. I've been doing it, and I've been finding, kind of like I've heard from a lot of people on past mission trips, and just in fellowshipping with people, that they tend to get a lot more out of it than the act of what they're doing. And I've just found it's been enriching. It's been um, I try to do it with always with a godly mindset, and I see it like it's allowed me to look at it not as a task, because I usually, being so practical and analytical and all of that, I look at things as tasks. I have to vacuum the floor. It's a task. And I get mad if it doesn't, if I bang the vacuum on something, I start getting angry. And I'm looking at this and I'm going, it's a privilege.
Yeah.
Like, it just feels like a privilege. That's the only thing I can think of it as. So that's, I don't know.
And it's it is such an amazing thing, because we had that meeting and we just talked about, what could we do, and we were kind of throwing out some ideas at the time, but we left the meeting here at the church without really knowing what it was going to look like. It's such a new experience. None of us have been through anything like that. And then yeah, a week or so into it, I was just talking to some different people in the church, and the family that runs the Bolton Central Clinic here, and Nora's actually watching right now. And I talked to Joe and just said, hey, if there's anything we can do, and being in that medical kind of those first responders, trying to help out where we can. And then he called me back a week or so later and presented this opportunity, and so called you, and you were all over it. And what was funny is I hadn't, and then after we talked, really didn't hear anything after that. Like, I didn't know how it was going, or if it was still going, or anything like that. And then talked to you, I think a couple of weeks after you'd started doing it, 2 or 3 weeks later, or something like that, and just found out that it was still going on, but just what it was doing more so. And I mean, it's obviously very important to those that are receiving the medications and things like that, but just what it was doing for you. And it really is, to me, it's such a testimony of those simple things. And that's, I think oftentimes we can miss our purpose. We were talking about purpose a minute ago. We can miss our purpose because we're looking for purpose in the big things. And sometimes we miss the purpose because we don't look at those little things. And yet the Bible is filled with the little things. You know, it's the boys. I've always loved the story where Jesus fed the 5,000, and when you read it in John, it specifically says Jesus asked them the question, you know, how are we going to feed them? He asked them this question to test the disciples, and immediately most of the disciples come back and go, we can't do it, Jesus. It's impossible. You know, there's no way. If we took, you know, we don't have anywhere near enough money what it would take. And then one of the disciples comes up and goes, listen, it ain't much, but I found this kid's lunch, you know, and what can you do with that? But it was just that act of just having the faith to go, here's something small, you know. But the fact that he brought it to Jesus and said, at the end of the day, I know it's not much, but I also know you're Jesus and you can use something small. And I think for a lot of people, yeah, I think a lot of people miss their purpose because they're looking for the big things. You mentioned the worship team. You know, it's sometimes in church we look at those people that are up front, you know, whether it's a worship team or the pastor who's speaking or whatever. We look at those things and we think, oh, those are the people with purpose. And yet it's the small things that sometimes make such an incredible impact. And so I think that's what you're seeing and that's what you're finding. And just in talking to you, it's been so cool just to listen to you when you had to go do this second round of isolation here just last week, in the last couple of weeks. It was this thing you said, I remember when we talked and you said, hey, I may need somebody else to do the deliveries for me, but once we're clear again, I want it back.
I'm not giving this away. Yeah.
I think those were your exact words, is I want it back. You know, it's like that's my thing. I want to do it.
I was greedy.
You were greedy. And I think it's okay to be greedy like that.
Greedy for ministry.
Yeah.
It's and I see it as like, just no matter how big or small a thing is, it's about like opening your heart to whatever God's purpose is for you at any given time. So whether, you know, you're Moses, you know, the shepherd, and you're called on to lead, you know, your people, you know, through the wilderness to the promised land, or whether you're the CEO of a major company and you're in this time, in this day and age, called to do something that might be seen as sort of a demeaning task. It doesn't actually matter. That was a big sort of insight for me, is if you open your heart, God's going to tell you what your purpose is at any given time. He's going to tell you. And so, you know, I can see a lot of people finding their purpose in this pandemic, people in our church, people outside of our church, they're finding their purpose. And it's really neat, because it's probably not the same purpose they had before the pandemic, but that doesn't matter, because God's working before, during, and after the pandemic. And right now he's giving me this purpose. And yeah, I've really, I like, the benefits to me are amazing. And you could all classify them as simple, small things, but you know, it's helping the pharmacy out. I've had the opportunity to meet some really awesome frontline people working at the pharmacy, number two. They're just sweet people who care about these patients. And I'm like, I'm amazed at it. Like, they have this love, and it doesn't seem like a job. It just seems like they care about these people, which further inspires me. You know, you have the physical or practical aspect of getting these meds to people who need them. Above and beyond that, another benefit that I've received from this is kind of meeting with those people. Like, I've seen, you know, some people that come to the door in a wheelchair, and a little more risky, but taking all the precautions I need to. And those people, you will hand them their medication. And it's a chance to have a little bit of human contact. Just, hi, how you doing? Is everything okay? Yeah. You know, just that little bit of communication that people, they need it. They
Right.
need it right now. You know, we're so devoid of it. So it's an opportunity for me to just even be a smiling face and say hi, and maybe brighten someone's day up just a little bit, even, you know, which is amazing. It's been a chance for me and my son Toby to bond, because he's learning driving right now. He's 17, so he'll do the driving and I'll do the back and forward work. So it's you know, and above and beyond that, even, there's the fact that it keeps us a little bit more sane and gives us purpose.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, and you used a word there a little while ago, but it's that practical. It's practical. And again, I think sometimes we miss purpose because we're looking for something so divinely supernatural that, you know, and yet going back to the Jesus feeding the 5,000, it's practical. I
Hmm.
mean, it seemed impractical to feed that many people, but at the end of the day, it's practical. He gave them lunch, you know, because they were
Hmm.
hungry, physically hungry, you know. It was that. And of course there's all kinds of other things that go on within the context of that, but it's the same thing I believe with something like this, is we have no idea what God's working behind the scenes. All we know is that sometimes, and more often than not, more often than the other, God is showing us purpose or leading us towards our purpose in very practical things. And um and I know that was something you said, is you used to view Christianity even as impractical. And the more that you've really sought God and kind of come into your own real relationship with Christ, is you're beginning to see more and more that it is just, it's practical.
I do, like, I see the sort of the supernatural working in the most simple, mundane things. And it's just sort of there. It kind of jumps out at me now that God's working in those things. And just like, feeding the multitudes, right? That it was practical, but it was supernatural. So, God did something amazing in that very simple, practical thing. He's working in all things. And I hear all these things that I used to think, God is working in all things. I'm just driving to work. He really is.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Like he's working in all things. And for me too, I guess as a side note, another sort of another benefit out of it is I think that certain certain aspects of our character, our biblical character, need practice. And doing simple things in a time like this is great practice for everyone. And like in characteristics like humility, for example, to just put one's needs aside. And I think the Bible throughout, I've always taken that sense of don't get too high on myself. And
Right.
it's right in there with looking at the big things all the time, because the little things, don't worry about those. Someone else will take care of that. You get that feeling, the lofty goals. And it's like, you know what? I think because we're human, God likes to keep us, just give us those reminders to remain humble. Because I think I personally sometimes, I can sort of miss those little things we keep talking about. And I need to get reset once in a while and go, you know what? It's about the humble, simple things, just
Yeah.
be in service,
Yeah.
you know.
So another thing I wanted to talk to you about is, because if anybody, those that are watching with us that are from Connect Church, and they would recognize you, and you've been very much, you and Helen have very much been a fixture in the church for as long as I can remember. Again, since I've been here, you guys have always been here, and very much a fixture. I mean, there's barely a Sunday that you guys miss where you are not there at 10:45. You got what? All right, but you, I mean, you're there. The point is you're there. All right, and but what most people probably don't know is, again, and this is why I wanted to have you on, is because, again, all of us are, everybody's called to something different, and God uses us in different ways, and yet I know that God is using all of us, and there's purpose in everything that we do, and purpose for all of us. And some of us find that purpose within the walls of the church, and then other people find that purpose outside of the walls of the church. And it's not to say that we can't all be used in both, but for some it's very very driven in certain places. And just in knowing you, and again in our conversations over the years, it's always stood out to me how much God really has opened doors for you, whether it's through the workplace or just, again, outside the walls of the church. And I had something go through my mind, and now I forgot what it was, but it's not it. I do know where I'm going. And so one of the things, though, that I wanted to talk to you about real quick and get you to speak to for a moment is just one of the, I told you the other day, one of the most common questions I get as a pastor is people coming to me and going, how do I hear from God? How do I know, how do I know it's God? And, I always tell a story about a pastor that I knew, and he'd always talk about, I sat down at the table the other day and I was having breakfast, and Jesus said this to me, and then I said this to Jesus, and then I said, and then he said, and it was this, he described this back and forth conversation. And then people would come, I'd be doing a Bible study or something. And they're like, man, how does that work? Is that what it's like? And I'm like, I've never had that experience before where it's like this back and forth dialogue with Jesus. And where it's like we're having breakfast together. But I have I have ways that I know it's God that speaks. And so, but everybody has kind of different experience. And you've had several experiences like that over the years that I've known you, especially, and one in particular that that happened. What was that? What would it be now with Graham? A year or so ago, or is
I
it
think
longer?
it was more than that, because I was working in my previous, excuse me, my previous department at work. I was in flight operations, and I moved into the safety department beginning of 2018. So almost probably pushing 3 years, believe it or
Oh,
not, I would
okay.
think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So to me, this is another example of being used and being available and being used outside the walls of the church, and especially kind of in that workplace environment. And so, if you will, just share with me kind of that story. The story I'm talking about, and so share with me
Yeah.
that story and kind of the process that you went through of just knowing that it was God and kind of what came through that.
I think it's funny, just as a preface, I think a lot of my praying feels like I'm having internal conversations too. And sometimes it can be a bit hard to put it into words, or to sort of discern what's me and what's God, because a lot of it is I it can be difficult. And I have a feeling he may speak to us differently, different people in different ways. He works with our character and our thought patterns, because he knows every electron in our brain as much as he knows every hair on our head. So
Right.
he knows how they fire and what the patterns are and what we've been through, and how to get through to us, I think. And the key is that as much as he can speak uniquely to each and every person, I think that there's one key thing that we need to do, and that's just simply to open our heart to it, to quiet the chaos and to open our heart to it. So I've often said to you, probably since not long after we met, I'm not a prayer. I watch in awe. As I say, like listening to how you pray, the eloquence, the way the words flow. It's like, wow, I'm in amazement, because I can't do that. I might be fairly articulate, on a Zoom. I hope. I don't know. Everyone can tell me later. But I can't pray like that, and I realize that that's kind of okay. And there's others like some of the senior members like Cliff and Olis. If it's okay if I shout you guys out, the way you guys pray, I respect it and I love it and I need it, and I can't do it. But the way that I pray, even Helen, again, shout out to my wife, but she prays beautifully. And the way that I pray is generally I just try to quiet the noise and open my heart, close my mind, so to speak, like shut down
Yeah.
all the worries, all the nonsense, all the noise from the day, all the emotions, and just kind of go, tell me. So with this particular event in my life, I guess, is it's something that I know you had spoken on numerous times, was, not just being a Christian in the church with our fellow Christians, but to walk the walk in everyday life. And the workplace is something you had mentioned before, and I've always tried to take that to heart in different ways. And there's been that voice in my head, like I say, there's that little voice going, the one voice while I'm sitting in church listening says, go in the workplace and talk to people about going to church and talk. And the other voice goes, HR is going to kill you. You can't do that. This isn't possible. How can you do that? you'll lose your job. So my other voice has sort of an odd European accent, but so I've always struggled with that. How can I do this? And one of my colleagues, he was Graham. You mentioned his name. He was director of the IT department, and I wasn't in the IT department at the time, but I had worked in the IT department probably for about 4 years of my career at Jazz Aviation, and I'd worked there for probably about 4 years, and we were good friends. I had reported to him, and we were good friends, but in the sense of colleagues plus. Like, how we have these concentric circles of relationships in our lives, and there's friends that you would go to their birthday party, and you would be very, very involved with their life. He was a colleague, but he was someone that I would do business events with, and we would enjoy talking together and those type of things. So close, but not super close, and that kind of couple circles out. So you'd spoken on this, and I don't think it was in close proximity to you having spoken on that particular item, walking the walk, and being a Christian in the workplace among every other place we should be, which is everywhere. And I guess at the time I was my heart I had it open, ready to receive, as I call it, and suddenly this, I'll just say voice. I don't know what you would say. Just a thought, a voice, again, hard to put into words, comes in and says, go and be with Graham, because he's going to pass soon. He had, to set it all up, he had terminal cancer. And he was probably in his last, they didn't know, but they said weeks at that point. And this had come to my attention. So I went, at first I got the message that he was sick, and it was just kind of like, oh, that's too bad. But again, having opened my heart after that, to whatever God's going to put in it, that was the thing that God put in my heart. He's like, Graham is sick, go and be with him, and make sure he's right with me, because he's going to be passing very soon. And I'm like, I still do that face, because I'm like, well, I'm kind of new to the, I say new all the time. I guess I'm not new to my relationship with Christ since 2012. It's 8 years, but I hadn't had this experience. So I'm still experiencing new things all the time. And it excited me. It scared me, freaked me out. Do I need meds? Because God's now telling me to do something. He told me, go.
Hearing voices, yeah.
Graham lived in Halifax, where Jazz head office is, and I live in Toronto. Now it's easy for us to fly, like we do get some kind of perks and stuff, but there's a bit of a money aspect, there's a time aspect, there's the fact that everyone's going to think I'm a whack job, because why would I fly all the way to Halifax to see someone that I'm not that close to talk to him about God in his last days of life, when his wife, I haven't met his wife before. How do I get there? There's all these practical pieces. The airport's way out in Enfield, which is not that close to downtown Halifax, where he was at the Queen Elizabeth, I think, QE2 hospital. So all these things are fighting against us, but on the other side, the good voice is saying, hey, you need to do this. You need to go and talk to him, and spend time with him, and sort of see him off before his journey to come to me, and talk to him about me. Okay. So I was like, I guess this is how it works. But I still might be a little bit crazy. So I sought counsel, because one thing that you've sort of mentioned over the years, Ben, is when you're not sure, assess yourself. So I assessed myself, and I said, well, is this voice telling me to do anything sort of bad? Not at all. Is this voice consistent? Like, is this just a fleeting thought? Is it just a thought? Or is it something that's truly on my heart? Yeah, it's consistent. It wouldn't go away for about a week or so, right? So, and then part of self-assessing is seek counsel from a godly person. So I knew one then, so I came to you, And I said, hey, this voice is telling me this to do this thing. It's kind of a big thing though. It's not like, buying, paying for it at Timmy's. This is a little different.
Right.
It seems a little big for me. And you gave me good counsel. You asked me some of those same assessment questions, and I answer them the same way. And you basically at the end of that chat, which was very encouraging, you said, just do it. If you can do it, follow your heart and do it. It seems like it's a very godly thing to do. And I was like, okay, I'm doing this. Why am I doing this? Because I'm being called to do this. Okay, so I did it. Hopped on a plane. I think I hopped on a plane. It was probably about a week or so. There was a couple Sundays in there, and then it was I think a Monday. I hopped on the plane, flew down to Halifax, and I got there. And one of my coworkers, good colleague, we've had a lot of really good discussions around Christianity over the years, and she's somebody who's seeking. And her name is Jane, and she said, what time are you getting here? I said, about 4 or so. Graham said he wanted to meet around 5:30 is a good time for him. And Jane said, okay, here's me worrying about how I'm going to get there. And I'm just going on faith. Jane says, I'll drive you down. I said, but you got things going on. Your husband needs you at home. You've got your young one. Just, no, my night's clear. I'll drive you down. And then that's where I look kind of, thanks God, just clearing the path. My flight was flawless. I had someone who wanted to go down with me, to visit Graham in the hospital. We get there. I mean, traffic was not bad. One of the things I think I mentioned to you, Ben, I wasn't even tired. Normally when I travel, I just get tired. I just feel run down at the end of a day, kind of a thing. And I was full of energy because I think the Spirit just instilled me with energy and excitement because I was doing what needed to be done.
Right.
And, we got down to the hospital, and, Graham was in bed. Obviously at that point, I think they had figured he probably had maybe a week. By the time I got down there and he had seen the doctors that day and everything, they figured he probably had maybe a week. And so we chatted with him for a little bit, lots of small talk. There's another friend there from work. His wife was there. And Graham's wife, she kind of said, are you guys good to stay with him for a bit? Because I got to go out and do a couple of chores. So I'm like, yeah, Jane and I, my colleague, were like, yeah, that's cool. We'll stay with him. And from that point, it was just a wonderful, magical visit for me. From that point, he needed his dinner, and his wife had prepared everything sort of in a Tupperware, and he just needed it sort of separated out and split out and microwaved and that. So Jane and I went off to the little kitchenette, and we did that. And I found that like a really an oddly enriching experience for me. Just the opportunity to kind of again be in service and to prepare his meal. And as we were doing that, as the microwave was cooking it up, warming it up for him, we shared a few tears, talking about Graham, and that we're going to miss him and everything. Went back to the room, and I guess maybe a little more small talk, Graham munching away and that sort of thing at his meal. Jane kind of looks at me, and again, I think God put in her heart it was the right time. She looks at me and she said, did you want to have a few minutes, just to chat privately with Graham? And I kind of went, thanks, God. And said, sure, that'd be great. She stepped out. And at that point, again, back to the original sort of discussion point is, how does God talk to you or me? I got to the stumbling point for me, which is, I'm going to pray with him now. I'm going to talk to him about God, and I'm going to pray with him. And then the little Eastern European voice comes in and goes, you don't know how to pray. I'm like, I know, I don't, but I'll deal with it because I got help. And I just kind of said, I'm going to just give it to the Spirit. The Spirit's going to give me the words. And I started talking about, just sort of introducing, talking about God and asking Graham, what are your thoughts? What are your feelings right now? Is it okay that we talk about this? Like I asked him, because I said, I just kind of showed up here to the blue. Is it okay we talk about this? He's like, He goes, for sure. He's like, for sure. I was like, wow, okay, here we go. And I prayed a little bit. I opened myself up to the Spirit, and I think I described it to you as a blackout. I don't remember what I said for probably the next 5 minutes.
Mhm.
But at the end of it, I could see a little bit more peace. And I wouldn't say, and not that I expect it as a goal ever. I wouldn't say that he was born again in that moment, but I think he came closer to God than he was 5 minutes before. I think that he was a little bit more at peace with himself, and I think he was thankful and very open to it. And that's all I could ever ask. Again, back to opening my heart, opening his heart. God's opening doors, opening hearts, and that was all I could ask for. And he was very gracious, and I was very, again, I felt privileged. It's almost like I feel like this sense of privilege and honor to be able to do that for God. It was an amazing, just an amazing experience for me. And he did pass away about 3 days later in the end. But it was just an awesome opportunity, and that's sort of the, how do I talk to God? That's sort of it. It's always about, just for me, opening my heart, and shutting out this guy, this little voice in this ear. Just, whatever, be quiet for a minute. I need to be quiet. It's just quiet. It helps me, and then I hear it, and I couldn't describe it per se, but like I say, when the Spirit spoke words through me to Graham, I was amazed by it. I think it's a miracle, but it was another way that God spoke to me. So in that case, I don't really remember what I said. In fact, I didn't remember when I walked out of the room. I didn't remember in the moment, but that was one of the ways that God spoke to me, or through me, more in that sense, which is awesome. And they're all okay to me, but the key to it, underlying it always, is to just be quiet, be still, and open my heart. That's when it all sort of happens for me.
Well, and it's another example of, I've said it before, and it's that idea that our responsibility is not the outcome. Our responsibility is the obedience. And so we can't control what happens, and that's up to God, that he's going to use it for whatever his intended purpose is to use it for. Ours is simply the obedience to do it. And I think that's what stops a lot of people is I don't know what's going to be the outcome. I don't pray well enough. I don't know the Bible well enough. I don't know the words to say, and all those things. And so it can be what deters us from stepping forward. And yet it's just the obedience. That's all God's looking for, is the obedience in these practical areas of ministry and life in general. And so, man, the time has flown by again. Thank you, Lino. I appreciate you coming. And I appreciate you coming and talking and telling your stories. Because again, I think what I take away from this, and what I take away from our conversations that we've had leading up to this, and is just the practicality of the Christian life in general. And again, it's that the practicality of just doing what we feel called to do, not doing what we feel like. This is hopefully everybody understands what I mean by this. It's not always doing what needs to be done. It's doing what we feel like we need to do. If that makes sense, because there's lots of things that are out there that need to be done, and we can get lost in the weeds of trying to make that happen and trying to do all of that. And in reality, God is going to use us for particular things, specific things. And, so that's why it's so important that we step up and we answer the bell, so to speak, when God rings it for us, when he calls us. And so, again, I go back to, I use this quote from William Barclay, who was a theologian, I think, in Scotland. And he said, the world is full of people who missed their destiny because they wouldn't pay the price. And it's really just, we don't know what's on the other side of us being open and honest and obedient, and we don't always see the immediate results of that. And yet we walk away from it just knowing the fact that we are obedient. And what you get is that sense again of privilege of, man, God used me. I don't know how he used me. I don't know what I just did. I don't know what I accomplished. I don't know how this fits into the grand scope of eternal life and heaven and all those things, but God's using you. And I appreciate your faith, and I appreciate your obedience, and I appreciate your friendship as well. So
same here, definitely.
thank you. Thank you so much for coming on, talking to me this fine Tuesday. For everybody watching, thanks. I'm waving at my iPad, but you're over here. I'm looking at your names and waving at the wrong place. So everybody watching, thanks for watching. Thanks for tuning in and saying hi to us, letting us know you're there. And join me next Tuesday, and I'll have another guest on talking about some more things, just to encourage us in our faith as we go through this. Just real people living real life, talking about real things. So thank you, Lino. God bless you, man. You can go get back.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yeah,
all
back
right.
to work.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Take care, everyone. Love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.